What if I told you that the two most powerful kings in medieval history, men who conquered nations, commanded armies, and made entire kingdoms bow, both died in the most humiliating, ridiculous, and disturbing ways imaginable? Not in glorious battle, not surrounded by weeping nobles and golden thrones. One was killed by a child with a kitchen pan, and the other exploded at his own funeral. Stay with me, because once you hear the full story, you will never look at power the same way again. Part 1. Richard the Lionheart. March 26, 1199. King Richard I of England, known across the entire medieval world as Richard the Lionheart, is standing outside a tiny, pathetic, barely worth mentioning castle in southern France called Chalus-Chabrol. And when I say tiny, I mean tiny. This castle was so poorly defended that historians record one of its last remaining defenders was a young boy, not a soldier, not a knight, a boy using a frying pan as a shield. A frying pan. Pan. Richard the Lionheart, the man who led the Third Crusade, who fought Saladin, who spent years crusading through the Holy Land, is standing outside this crumbling little fortress, looking at a child with cookware. And he laughed. He actually mocked the boy, taunted him, clapped and cheered sarcastically at the ridiculous sight. Richard was so unimpressed by this castle that on the evening of March 26th, he walked the perimeter without his chainmail armor. No protection, no urgency, just a king strolling around like he was inspecting a garden. The shot, and that is when the boy fired. One crossbow bolt. It struck Richard in the left shoulder close to the neck. Not immediately fatal. Richard actually laughed it off at first. This was a man built for war. He had survived battles, crusades, sieges. A single bolt from a child felt like nothing. But here is where things went very, very wrong. The bolt had to be removed. A surgeon was called, and the extraction was botched. The surgeon dug into the wound, caused massive additional tissue damage, and left the injury in a state far worse than the bolt itself had created. Within days, infection set in. Within days after that, gangrene. For those who don't know what gangrene is, it is when flesh begins to die and rot while it is still attached to your living body. The smell is unmistakable. The pain is beyond description. And in 1199, there was absolutely nothing medicine could do to stop it. Richard the Lionheart, Conqueror, Crusader, one of the most feared warriors in European history, was rotting alive from a wound caused by a child with a frying pan shield. The deathbed. And now, this is the part that will genuinely stay with you. Richard knew he was dying. He requested the boy be brought before him. Imagine that scene. The greatest warrior king in England, lying in bed, flesh going black, fever burning through his body, and in walks this terrified young boy who just killed a king by accident with one lucky shot. Richard looked at the boy and asked simply, why? The boy, knowing he was almost certainly about to be executed, stood his ground and answered honestly, "You killed my father. You killed my brothers." Richard the Lionheart, in his final days, in agony, dying from this boy's bolt, was silent for a moment. And then he forgave him, completely, fully, without condition. He ordered the boy freed, released without punishment. And he gave him 100 silver shillings from his own treasury. A dying king forgiving the person who killed him and paying him on the way out. That is one of the most quietly extraordinary moments in all of medieval history. Richard the Lionheart died on April 6, 1199. 11 days after that, crossbow bolt found his shoulder. The betrayal. But the story does not end there. The moment Richard died, his general, a brutal mercenary commander named Mercadier, ignored every single one of the king's final wishes. He had the boy hunted down and executed in the worst way imaginable. The child Richard had forgiven, freed, and paid was flayed alive and hanged. The king's last act of mercy was undone within hours of his death. Richard the Lionheart died at 41 years old, killed not by Saladin, not by a crusade, not by a rival king, but by one bolt, one bad surgeon, and 11 days of gangrene. Part 2. William the Conqueror. The man. Now let's talk about William the Conqueror. 1066. The most famous year in English history. William of Normandy crossed the English Channel, fought the Battle of Hastings, killed King Harold, and seized the entire Kingdom of England in one campaign. He ruled for over 2 decades. He built the Tower of London. He commissioned the Domesday Book, a complete survey of every piece of land and property in England. He reshaped English law, language, and culture so fundamentally that we still feel it today. He was, without question, one of the most consequential men in medieval European history. He was also, by his later years, enormous. Historical records are not kind about this. William had grown severely obese. Contemporary accounts describe a man so large that the King of France, his rival, made a cruel joke comparing William to a pregnant woman about to give birth. William did not forget that joke. The injury, July 1087. William is 60 years old, campaigning in northern France, burning the town of Mantes to the ground in retaliation, likely including for that very joke. He is riding through the burning town on horseback. The horse, startled by flames, by embers, by the chaos of a burning city, rears back violently without warning. The saddle pommel, the hard metal knob at the front of a medieval saddle, drives directly into William's large abdomen with full force. The impact ruptured his intestines internally. William survived the initial injury. He didn't die in the street, but he knew immediately something was catastrophically wrong. He was carried to Rouen, placed in a bed, and spent the next 6 weeks in agony, slow, grinding, internal agony, as his ruptured organs gradually failed him from the inside. On September 9, 1087, William the Conqueror died. But the story, the truly unforgettable part of the story, had not even started yet. To funeral, William's body needed to be transported to Caen to the abbey he himself had built for burial. It was summer. The body had been lying in the heat for days before transport arrangements were made. By the time the funeral procession arrived at the church, William's corpse had been decomposing in summer temperatures for an extended period. Decomposition gases had built up inside the body. The corpse had swollen. And then they discovered the problem. The stone sarcophagus, the burial coffin that had been prepared and waiting, was too small. William's obesity, combined with the dramatic bloating from decomposition, meant that the body simply would not fit into the stone tomb that bore his name. So, the bishops and funeral attendants made a decision. They would force it in. They began pushing, compressing, trying to fold and press a bloated, decomposing royal corpse into a stone box that was not built for it. And then, William the Conqueror's abdomen burst open. In the middle of the cathedral, in front of the bishops, the nobles, the mourners, the priests. The gases and fluids that had built up inside the body during decomposition exploded outward. The stench that filled that cathedral, historians who recorded the event described mourners gagging, vomiting, running for the exits. Nobles and clergy who had come to pay their respects to the Conqueror of England were fleeing the building with their robes over their faces. The funeral was cut short. Attendants rushed through the remaining rites as fast as physically possible, shoved what remained into the sarcophagus, sealed it, and evacuated. The man who conquered England, who reshaped an entire nation, was buried in a ceremony ended early because his own body exploded in the middle of it. 2 kings. Richard the Lionheart, undefeated in battle, survivor of Crusades, one of the greatest warrior kings in European history, brought down by a child with a frying pan, a bad surgeon, in 11 days. William the Conqueror, the man who changed England forever in a single year, dies from a saddle, rots in summer heat, and detonates at his own funeral. History books give you the victories, the battles, the crowns, the conquered kingdoms. They give you the statues and the titles and the legacy. What they don't tell you is how it ended. And how it ended for these 2 men is a reminder that no amount of power, no title, no throne, no army, nothing, protects you from the small, stupid, absurd, deeply human ways that life can simply end. A frying pan, a saddle, a botched surgery, a coffin slightly too small. Biology does not read the history books. It doesn't know you conquered England. It doesn't care that they called you the Lionheart. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person who actually loves history. Not the boring textbook version, the real version, the version nobody taught you in school. Like and subscribe, because there are 100 more stories exactly like this one, and every single one of them is better than anything on TV. V.